Risk Assessment and Grantee Partner Selection. I would like to welcome our moderator and panelists to the days. Our moderator for the session, Romit Sen, Senior Vice President, Sustainability, HSBC India. Our panel members, Abhejit Agarwal, Senior Vice President and Head Sustainability and CSR, Axis Bank. Avilash Dwivedi, CSR Head, Mahindra and Mahindra Limited, Automotive and Farm Sector. Savita Mundhe, Head CSR, School Education, JSW Foundation. Ahona Ghosh, General Manager, Sustainability, Godrej Consumer Products Limited. Senior Vice President, Head Sustainability and CSR, Axis Bank. Avilash Dwivedi, CSR Head, Mahindra and Mahindra Limited, Automotive and Farm Sector. Savita Mundhe, Head CSR, School Education, JSW Foundation. Ahona Ghosh, General Manager, Sustainability, Godrej Consumer Products Limited. A huge of a round of applause.
We'll wait for Abhejit. Let the chai pe charcha happen. We'll kind of begin with the discussion once Abhejit is here. He's here. Thank you so much. And again, welcome everybody. I think before I go into what the panel and the topic is, I've been religiously instructed by the organizers that, we'll have because we are running a little behind schedule. There is a session after this. Bombay Chambers has a program after this, and some people have to leave for outstation. So we'll have a curtailed session of about 40 minutes. Welcome everyone. As someone who's fascinated by numbers and data and dates, I think August 29, 2013 was when the President, late Pranab Mukherjee, officially gave an assent to the bill, which became the Act, the CSR Act. So of course, 12 years and 20 days, and I think while a lot of has been spoken around how the money has increased, how as a sector we have collectively learned and grown, I think the point that kind of struck me once, I heard was also the whole aspect of professionals. As professionals, I am also sure we have grown and learned so much over the last 10 years. And we have incredibly, I would say, talented and distinguished set of professionals who have been in this space. Abhejit, Avilash, Savita, and Ahona. Just very briefly on how we would like to structure the session. I think after, once I have finished, I'll kind of ask each one of you in 2 to 3 minutes, give a little perspective on the theme of risk assessment, grant and partner selection. Basically, more inward looking around how you've been doing, what approaches you've been following, that perhaps could set the setting context. After that, I'll pick up 1 or 2, follow-up questions basis your submission made. We'll then open it up for questions for the audience, and then, of course, we will conclude. So, to begin with, and I'm sure that, I'm also very mindful of the time, that, picking up from the fireside chat and also the theme that's there, that, which is about aligning purpose, practice, what we are going to discuss in this session around risk assessment and due diligence and partner selection are key aspects of driving and deepening impactful CSR. So from that point of view, I think this, and if you look at the whole cycle of program, management, this perhaps forms the initial and perhaps the most critical aspect when you go about beginning with what you want to do, with whom you want to do, and how you want to do. I think for the audience perspective, I think we'll be looking at the risk, some of the risks that are associated, whether it is around compliance, governance, execution, capacity, and perhaps also reputation, because we live in a world where social media and the scrutiny by it's good to have that, but I think there are also certain guardrails that exist. But that perhaps is going to be the lay of the land of the session that we will now just begin with. I'll perhaps pass on the mic to you, Abhejit, to kind of make your introductory remarks from 2.5 minutes around what have been your approaches.
Sure.
And how do you go about doing it?
Sure. Good evening, everyone, and thank you to Bombay Chamber for having me here, and a pleasure to see all of you and some of you who've been associated with Axis also in the past and our partners. So, this topic is so wide and so diverse. It is like looking at an elephant, that story that, there's a trunk and there's a tail, there are feet and there are ears. I want to touch upon, and I think a lot of the key buzzwords all of you have already heard during the day to day in terms of transparency, in terms of accountability, in terms of trust. So there's one aspect I just want to highlight, and I've thought about this often because I do get asked about this a lot, and especially from NGOs, that where do we start? How do we get, say, an Axis, for example, to start to work with us? And honestly, I tell them there's no right, honestly, it's just being at the right place at the right time. There's no formula. Sometimes things work, sometimes things don't work. But the key aspect is just to keep at it, keep communicating. And really, I think this point was made very well earlier today, is you have to, NGOs also, non-profits also, institutional CSR recipients also have to start learning the language of the corporate mindset and start understanding the corporate mindset. And again, Louis talked about private equity. In fact, our chairman of the CSR committee made a similar analogy just a few days ago in a meeting, that as a bank, we lend, so we make an investment. So the CSR also sometimes has to be looked from the same lens. So if you are on the other side and looking for it, what do you need is ultimately transparency, and you have to give that donor the trust that their funds are traceable, you can track them, and that they're reaching the last mile. So I think these are some of those aspects I have to highlight. And one point I want to highlight especially on this aspect is, I think a lot of CSR decision making, in my experience, it begins at the top. So I think a lot of how organizations invest in CSR really comes to the vision of the board, or if the vision of the promoter, for example, and that could be anywhere. I think I was just making this point earlier to someone, is saying no is also a part of our jobs, because we have to say no so many times. And you want to work, in my personal capacity, I would love to work with many, many NGOs, but then I'm a part of a larger hierarchy. It's a larger decision-making process. And I think that's where we all have to work. And ultimately, it is just about communicating, being present. And I think I'll just stop here, and that's my opening statement.
Thank you, Avilash. Give me enough pointers to ask you the follow-up question. But sorry, Abhejit, but Avilash, I'll come to you.
Risk assessment and grant selection is something where two organizations, two entities come together to know each other and take certain basic steps as they move towards building trust. For me, that's basically what risk assessment would be. And in due course of time, each of the organizations tend to ask themselves and to each other, are we making the right decision in remaining invested? And in order to do that, what are the processes we have to take so that we come to a conclusion that we are good to go? In this, transparency and accountability from both sides is important. It's not just the donor who has the questions to ask and the recipient only has to make the answers. It's both ways. So it's pretty balanced, and you understand each other's risks, you understand each other's thing, and very importantly, make a decision on the basis of both subjective and objective assessment of each other. That's risk assessment and selection of grantee for me.
Savita.
I'll just put a sectorial perspective over here, because I head the JSW Foundation education vertical, and especially we deal with the children in the rural schools. So when we do the need assessment, our partner, we always look into their credibility in the market, the impact which they have achieved, their governance system, and the policies like POSH, even the Child Protection Act policies, whether they are in the place. As Jayanta has said that Magic Bus of India, he also mentioned about the robust policies which they are internally following. And I think that is the right approach which they are taking, which becomes very easy for the corporates to adopt that model without struggling for any other things. Because now everyone in the organization has become responsible for the CSR Act, and as well as the CSR with the communities, because community also ask you the questions, what impact you are giving to us. Because in most of the location we have our plants, and we are actually answerable to our community. So for us, due diligence and need assessment is really a major factor, and we give a very thorough thought to that process.
Sure. Thank you, Savita. Ahona.
Yeah. So for us at Godrej Consumer Products, I think when we look at due diligence, it's an evolving journey for us. From time to time, we keep looking at the frameworks that we have built. How do we strengthen it? And there is a symbiotic relationship between due diligence, between regular course of monitoring that we do for our projects, and also the third-party audits that we do of our projects on a yearly basis. So there is a relationship there that if we do all three together well, then risk does get minimized over time. But it's a journey. We keep evolving. We keep learning. A couple of things, like while we do all of the documentation checks, while we do the field visits, we talk to the management of the organization, and there have been times, and we have to also see if their objectives and mission is aligned with what we are trying to achieve on the field. That is really critical. And what is their connect with the community? That is important. Are there any reputational risks? And more importantly for us is how much sway do they have with the government departments that we work with. So for Godrej, whatever work that we do across our CSR sectors, we work very closely with those relevant government departments, because at the end of the day, the idea is CSR money is finite and we can only do so much. And after the cycle is over, the ideal way, how do we sustainably exit is to work with the government, hand it over to them, and scale with them, because they are the only one. That's the only way really to scale if you work with the government closely. So how much sway does an implementation partner have with that local government, the local administration? Because people come, chairs keep changing, but you will have to be able to mobilize that support, get the approvals, get the necessary, clearances in place. Otherwise, because that is critical to the growth and, sustainability of the project in the long term. So these are things that we look for. And while we have our due diligence framework and checklist, some of the learnings I would just like to quickly talk about is we've learned not to make decisions on partner selection in isolation. It's always good to have an extra pair of, eyes. So we work closely with our legal department. We work closely with our audit teams. We make sure that, the decision to select a partner is not any one person's in the team. But there have been 2-3 checks that have been done. We have strong documentation is the key, right from the beginning, till the end of the project. Because when we go up to the board for approvals, if we are able to show a strong documentation trail, very few questions are asked. Because sometimes, despite doing all the checks and balances in place, the reality is, in the field, sometimes they do go wrong, right? But if we are keeping all of this documentation, if we are keeping all of these records, our communication, our monitoring reports, our audit reports, everything in place, very few questions will be asked then at the board level in terms of, if we decide to kind of separate on a partnership. So these are things that we have kind of learned. But at the end of the day, having done all of this, things do go wrong, as I said. But what we also look at, we call this the eyes. The main thing really is to see what is the organization we are going to partner with. What is their intent? What is their commitment? And what is their execution skills? So we call it, does the organization have eyes, right? And if it has eyes, then that's if it looks good, feels good, then we kind of go ahead with it.
Sure. Thank you, Ahona. You spoke about that word audit, and I'll come back to you with a question on that. But Abhejit, we heard Louis spoke that as an organization you have, I would say, been, and it's commendable, we spoke before we met that, a lot of the organizations that you have partnered with come from very remote areas, are very small organizations who are perhaps very early in their evolution space. So, of course, would acknowledge and commend you and the foundation for that. Now, when you look at organizations who are perhaps, new, are evolving in terms of setting up their systems and setting up, their processes, what are, say, some of the considerations? Have you faced any challenges? And I know that because some of your partners that you have invested are, as I said, coming from those difficult areas. What have been some of the considerations, challenges? And have you also looked at, this thing came up in the beginning, that there's a cost of compliance, and of course CSR being restrictive. So what have been some of the approaches that you and the foundation have kind of looked at specifically for those organizations coming from remote places and perhaps who are growing?
Sure. So like the point I was making in my earlier monologue was that ultimately a lot of what we do flows from the vision and the guidance we receive from the board and the senior leadership. Now, and I really commend Axis Bank's board, the CSR committee, that again, looking at who we are as an organization, we are a pan-India bank. We consider ourselves as an institution that has a role to play in nation building, and this phrase was used this morning. So, in that role also, then CSR becomes an equally important factor. So that is where we are moving to, and so that is how the Northeast came about, for example. That is how Central India came about. So Axis Bank already has a near 20-year-old organization, a foundation, Axis Bank Foundation, which has already done a lot of work. Right now, in the last 5 years though, and especially after 21 regulations, a lot of things have changed. So again, I think in nature of who we are, an Axis Bank, I think, at least for my leadership, compliance is a hygiene factor. They know that we will manage compliance. So how do we move beyond that? So we have to work at a level higher, and I really liked what Ahona you said about having eyes. Is the conversation we are having, and it's still a learning process for us. So we have tried to strengthen our due diligence, our governance. So for example, even before taking a program, we want to be on the ground. And I think some of you mentioned that. We do want to be on the ground, get a sense of the space, get a sense of where this partner wants to work, where it is working, and what they want to achieve. And I think we have to be out there. And I think the first feedback for me personally in my career in the CSR domain was that you have to be out there more. So we've been following that diligently, and I think that gives a much more clarity in what a partner wants to do and what they want to achieve. So that's one. Number two is, again, there's no formula. So like I said, due diligences are doable. There is third-party audits, everything that happens. But how do you assess reputational risks, for example? How do you assess other risks which cannot be quantified? And that is where I think a lot of our own experience and perception also plays an important role. Working with the government, for example, has been one such area which has sometimes can be tricky and sometimes can work very well. So again, these are learnings that generally come. There's a lot of assessment. I again like that point about there are multiple stakeholders. We have to try to look at various views. And on top of it, of course, we have to be very quick, because ultimately the law also requires us to utilize our funds. And actually that's where I appreciate also the regulations, and Dr. Chatterjee is left, but that the law has actually, I feel, allowed the corporate sector to really put in place long-term strategies and take a long-term position. And I think that really then allows us to work with partners for the longer run. Because now that is one aspect we have adopted in our mindset. We want to work for the long run, we want to be deep, and be able to also support the NGOs grow. So again, the last point I want to make is, so another mandate again from our leadership was that while we can work at a national level, we can work with the large universities and large institutions, we must continue to play the role of building the ecosystem. So we also try to work with smaller NGOs, smaller younger NGOs, and work in regions where generally CSR doesn't flow, like it was highlighted. So these are the mandates on which we then do our decision making. Yeah.
Thanks, Abhejit. It's an interesting reflection around both. One, of course, which is coming from the institutional leadership, but it's also about a combination of top-down and bottom-up, where every professional who's part of yourself and the team are doing. But I think you also make an important point that you have to perhaps walk alongside with the partner that you are likely to work and you will engage with. Thank you. I will come back to you. Avilash, I think you are, you represent, Mahindra and Mahindra and Automotive and the farm sector. If I were to just pick up the aspect of program design, and a lot of the times, people question about short-term versus long-term, intent and impact. So when you are looking at, and perhaps this question is when you're looking at a project to fund, one of course is, the the governance around it, the compliance around it. But when it comes to the design phase, and say particularly for, a sector like agriculture, where sometimes the outcomes are not very linear, that, X rupees invested with lease. There's also a time series to which that impact takes time to happen. Would love to hear your reflections that while you do risk assessment, due diligence, partner selection, what are there any thoughts that you have around the program design? Because in the long run, the linkage of the program design activities will have an impact on implementation, utilization, reporting and disclosure. Any thoughts that you have?
See, in terms of program design, we listen to also the organizations who implement it at the ground level. Many a times you will realize that what they would have been saying at the beginning would have been mostly right and what we thought it would have been. Okay, so while the leadership gives you a broader idea, but the need assessment basically should allow us to decide how things would evolve and what can be done collectively. So we bring in even our people to share their competencies. Most of the time corporates are looked at that we are there to give grants, but no. We also look at how can we bring our competencies which we as an organization can offer to leverage some of the competencies even for the implementing partners. So in that design itself, for example, if you are getting into automotive skilling for that matter, we know what is the contemporary industry skilling ask. So we bring in and try to curate program modules, training modules to that manner, which makes the youth, be it at a ITI or any other institution, understand that what more can be value added to his or her existing learning curve, and accordingly take these things forward. While in the due diligence process or the research, we also try to see whether that organization has done something in the past and has some amount of experience, or we use our experience to build for them to build on. Right. So in that matter, you make it mutual, you make it engaging, you are co-creating things, not just funding and asking what the KPIs are and so on and so forth. We also have farm division where we have agronomists in our organization. So if it is crop diversification, if it is anything, we work with the people on the ground who hear the sound better, and we also deliberate with them in taking these nuances both back and forth. Sometimes the farmers won't listen to what we both say together, and later on when we would ask them that what is your experience, the farmer would say, I'm a bit unhappy, and when we would ask why, because the moment a farmer or the community says I'm not happy, then it's red flag for us. But then the answer would come, the farmer said, I wish I had listened to you completely rather than sticking to my traditional thought process. So in that manner, the design and everything goes into putting things together collectively, hearing them out, and making them also realize that what we are saying also, does it make sense? But yes, it's a long journey.
Right.
Everyone is fixated to their ideas. It takes time to happen.
Sure, thank you. I'll come to you, Savita. You said that, and of course a lot of us will agree that perhaps a lot of things are, there. They are systems, they are, ways, they are manuals which are critical to the whole aspect of assessing risk and due diligence. But there's also an element of perhaps capacity building for people who are, say, within the CSR space, because ultimately, while you can lay down processes, procedures in manual, it's people who would have to do it. So I would want to touch upon the aspect of building capacities, both for CSR teams and also for your partners that you engage with, because, the alignment or, the engagement will perhaps only happen when, we come to a common space, not only with respect to, and I would specifically, touch upon due diligence a bit. Has there been some efforts that, like the foundation have taken, you have taken around enabling your teams to perform due diligence better, your team and perhaps also the partners?
Very valid question. So when initially we started our CSR work in a framework manner, like for every project we create a log frame wherein we give the indicators, timeline, the methodology, the baseline, end line, and the baseline, midline, and the end line. Initially, we got a lot of resistance from our CSR colleagues from locations wherein they say that कि मैम ये क्या है, हम तो पहले तो सिर्फ CSR का प्रोजेक्ट करते थे, ये मॉनिटरिंग वगैरह हमें नहीं जमेगा, because they don't have that capacity to monitor what is happening. But now, because of the key indicators, because of the milestone payment, milestone-based payment, even partner have also realized if they are reporting anything and if they want to invoice anything, they have to give their key indicators, what they have achieved for that particular quarter. And this has become mandate for the CSR people at locations. Unless they will not show whether they have the partner have achieved that indicators or not, they will not release their payment. So it has become a guidelines for each one of us to follow all this protocol. And as if you are talking about the due diligence process, JSW Foundation is following a very robust, transparent and structured due diligence process. Initially, our internal audit do the field visit, programmatic as well as financial. Then the third party audit happens. And after that audit, we do a very detailed review with the partner. On the basis of we get the audit report. And we upfront tell all our partners that this is not the investigation. These are all our learning, which we have to learn and we have to overcome that during the process. And very kindly, all our partners accept that process. They inbuild that process into their system and they implement that in their next plan of action, which is really helpful to both JSW as a corporate and a partner as an implementing.
Sure. That's interesting one, of course, because I think the whole aspect of learning and perhaps also unlearning is continuous and evolutionary. Ahona, I gave a hint as to where I will come to you is audit, and we all know that the whole aspect of what we are talking about, risk assessment to due diligence. How do you feel having a robust mechanism? I mean, or perhaps if I were to frame the question, how have you used your risk assessment and due diligence? How it has enabled, addressing questions, around, say, audit of CSR programs?
Yeah. So I think I will answer this by giving an example, Romit. We had a case in the past where one of the, when we'd worked with this partner for a long time. There was a long-term partnership. The organization was also part of an international, they had an international parent organization. And when they separated, we continued funding them. Our program also kind of scaled up with them. And one of the things that came up in an audit after, in one of the audit reports was that their our grant funding was, more than 60% of their overall budget. So that was a huge red flag and a huge audit red flag for us. Because if anything should happen to that organization, and we have scaled up so significantly with them, that impacts us, that impacts them as well, because they need to have a diversified, funding portfolio as well for the stability and financial stability and health of their organization, right? So what we did, it just happened over time that we scaled up their organization, leadership also. There were changes. There was a missing second line when this transition happened. And our whole focus was, what about the communities that we are, impacting with this partner? So thankfully, the program was going well. There wasn't any programmatic or financial discrepancies. But this came up as, and we caught it early to say that at this point of time, with these transitions and the changes in the way we've also scaled up, this has been, a red flag. So what we did to mitigate this was really to, invest in institutional building of our partner. So we, funded an organization development exercise. We brought in consultants to help them, really build certain governance structures, build a second line of leadership, diversify their funding, get expertise, have a fundraising team. And so all of that, institutional building really helped us, mitigate risk, not just for ourselves, but also for the partner. And how this really tied up with our due diligence, it all loops back into our due diligence as well, to say that as a company, we made a decision that we should not be funding anything more than a 20 to 25% exposure of their revenue. going forward. And that's something that got built into our due diligence framework and our processes, and that is something that we also kind of started assessing as we onboarded new partners and kept monitoring our existing partners. So that's how that framework gets strengthened and that relationship, works in
very
tangent.
interesting approach, because what you spoke about is the institutional capacity building. I have worked in the non-profit sector for 18 years before I moved into the other side of the fence, as I call it. But we all know that CSR grants perhaps a little restrictive. So my question to you is that what you supported as part of the OD or institutional development was what part of the project, or what you as an institution invested in getting?
No, that was not part of the project. We made a separate.
Yeah. So which I think is an incredible amount, and I think the organization and the team deserves a huge round of applause, because that is perhaps a ray of hope for the I think sector, because who makes that investment? For philanthropies, for development grants to make that investment is perhaps easier, but as a CSR, if you are doing it, which is an incredible amount. So
I think just want to say, see, our partners are really the ones doing all the hard work on the ground, right? Yeah. And if they are, helping us deliver outcomes and achievements in an ethical and transparent manner, we should be supporting them. Yeah. And these are rare cases. This is not, this is not the norm. These are rare cases.
Mind you, we have non-profits here, so if you need OD money, you know where to go. So
you're opening a can of worms.
Just want to add Ahona's thing. See, all our partners are really hardcore partners. They know how to work on ground. They have empathy, they have kindness, they know how to deal with the community. But sometimes they don't follow our expectation, because when corporate asks about the documentation, photo ये style में आना चाहिए, black नहीं होना चाहिए, हमारा branding दिखना चाहिए, these things they don't follow, and there they fall behind. And there we need to strengthen them. And as Jen said that they have such a robust system in the organization, I think you should lead all these things. You can charge for that. We can fund you.
Sure. Thanks. Abhejit, I'll come to you. You are in a financial institution, while of course you have spoken around the risk. Yeah. But I think we are also talking about, which also came up is due diligence risk assessment involves a lot of data. Technology as an enabler to help you in due diligence and risk assessment, data security, integrity. Any reflections on that, and any good practices, approaches that you would want to share from your exercise?
No, certainly. I think even for a bank our size, I'm not saying that we are very experienced, but it's an uphill journey, and it requires a lot of upskilling, and it requires a lot of innovation at our end also. We have been, see, in terms of policies and documents, at least I think we've moved to a point where things are in place, but data, for example. So being able to better capture data on the ground, being able to better manage data, I think that's a journey. New aspects like DP, DPA, for example, how do you weave that in? So that's something, conversation we've been having. And again, because we're a bank, so it's a very, very serious matter for us also. So that applies on what you're doing in CSR also. In fact, that's one of the areas also where we're now engaging with our partners on how are they approaching DP. And most of them were not aware. So my first recommendation to them was simply look at it, read through what the act or the act could be and how it applies to you, because you're all collecting data and you're all collecting consumer data and citizen data. So like those kind of aspects, I think, like I said, it's a journey moving from how to be person dependent to process dependent. That it can never get over. We can only move up. But like I said, I think one point I want to highlight again is I think we spend a lot of time on due diligence, and I think aligned to what everyone here is saying, that if you're able to build that, identify a good partner, then I think the job is half done. Because if you're able to, again, we cannot, as a CSR donor, we cannot be present in a program or in a fund up NGO forever. So there have to be exits. So over there also aspects like capacity building, hand-holding become very important. We encourage partners to start building their corpus. We work a lot with our partners. You talked about data, I know, I'm sorry, I digressed a bit. But because again, transparency, better reporting, better disclosures, better communication, all of these are aspects which will not just help us, but from a NGO's point of view, it will really help them be able to better present themselves in the CSR domain as good partners.
Yeah. Thanks. Avilash, to you. I mean, we can have the best of the systems, we can have the best of the processes, you can best of the manuals. And I'm not talking about the programmatic challenges that happen, but more in terms of that crises do emerge. For sometimes of reason obvious and sometimes perhaps it are not so obvious. When, I mean, when or a crisis emerges, or if there has been a crisis, how have you looked at kind of using those as kind of ways of strengthening your system so that there's a feedback mechanism around, and specifically around risk and due diligence partner. So what will be some of your reflections that in terms of incidences where things perhaps have not gone right, how have you as an organization or perhaps you as an individual in this space looked at, and what will be your thoughts?
It happens both ways. All of a sudden, a donor says, we are withdrawing midway. I won't talk just from the corporate side and corporate's risk, which corporate would come across. I'll talk from both sides. And I start from the not-for-profit because for me, I see they having more of a risk than we. Why? Because that's the biggest thing which can put every plans to be laid down at the ground at risk, because they also go with their reputation when they connect with the community.
Yes.
Okay? Right?
Very important.
They front end it, honestly speaking. So, in such situations, how one wriggles out or one comes out of it is a challenge. Only people who face it know that better than anybody else. But yes, right at the beginning of due diligence and when you sign MOUs and do all these things, it's better to set expectations right and walk the talk both sides, number one. On the corporate side, if you look at, are the resources being used in a manner which is bona fide in nature? That's a fundamental core requirement. Okay, is the money going to the end community for whom the money is intended? Now, in my personal experience over 2.5 decades, I've seen that many a times regulators getting harsh on the implementing partner and they going the rough weather. Okay. We know about the income tax, the FCRAs and so on and so forth in the world, and then at that point of time, imagine a hypothetical situation where the bank account of the implementing partner gets frozen and you have 45% of your funds looming large to get utilized at the end of the year, and you have to go back to your board and say, I've ensured 100% utilization and the project has met the objectives as per the requirement for this year. So these are certain situations where at the end of the day, you don't have a quick solution or an answer, but you have to deal with it. So it's very important that due diligence or risk assessment is an ongoing process. It can't be just at the beginning. Okay, I'm sure most of the organizations who are from the not-for-profit sector in this room know very well their 12A ATG is going to expire by 31st of March 2026 this year. You got it in the beginning, and when the finance bill 2020 came, 2026, 31st March, it's going to get over. I'm sure most of you would have started getting on with the CBDT's Central Board of Direct Taxation asking for a renewal. Now the situation is 1st of April, most of them, imagine they don't have the 12A ATG renewal certificate with them, nor there is any circular from the CBDT saying that it stands extended until further circular. How do you deal? You hold your programs, you stop. So many times we live in a world of VUCA where we don't have answers to this. That's where I say what is important is having a leap of faith, both sides, understanding both each other's risks, taking things forward. A corporate is interested that the money is spent in the right way, you get the right bang for the buck, and eventually the not-for-profit says, here the community stay invested with us so that over a period of 3 to 5 years, we achieve what we started off with.
Very valid. Savita, I would want to come to you around this whole aspect of reputational risk. I mean, perhaps there's reputational risk either ways, but perhaps in terms of looking at, one is of course you spoke about building an inherent, coherent, tight system, you spoke about capacity building, but I think in terms of addressing reputational risks, which may emerge as a result of certain practices. What will be some of your reflections at how do we look at minimizing reputational risks that could perhaps also come from, say, how a project outcomes have been communicated, or the association with whom it is, as you said, government, you perhaps also work with a lot of government agencies. So what are, say, some of your thoughts around managing reputational risks?
See, being in the corporate world, you first of all think about the reputational risk because it's directly affect to your organization. So whenever we start any of our project or whenever we do any kind of expansion, first 1 year before that expansion, CSR team is there on the ground to create that environment, that ecosystem, to build a rapport with the community. So every time, whenever we do, I'll just talk about my sector because we are dealing with the schools. So when we do any kind of project with the school children, we don't just deal with the school children. We get connected with their parents. We get connected with the management. We get connected with the government. And these kind of way, like we create the ecosystem over there that we are not here only for the students' learning outcome, but we are here to be with you to have that environment wherein your child as well as the community can develop. So this kind of approach we always take in the organization.
I'm mindful of the time, but Ahona, you will of course get a second question, which is largely around delays, and perhaps because CSR also has a disclosure element and aspects, say, around grants not being utilized during that period. So one, of course, direct question is, what are, say, some of the adaptive strategies that you as a CSR team develop to kind of look at aspects such as unutilization, reallocation, things like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's something that's part of the job of a CSR program lead on an ongoing basis, right? To ensure that there is ongoing monitoring. So we at Godrej, consumer products, what we do is we have a monthly utilization, certificate that the partner has to submit to us on a monthly basis. So that's how closely we monitor the utilization, because utilization, 100% utilization is a compliance for us that we want to kind of make sure that happens. For the past 3 years, we've been able to achieve 100% utilization of our funds, year on year. So there is the monthly submission of utilization reports. Then we also do if we feel, and an ongoing conversation with the partner, field visits to say, like, how are things going, where can, what are the challenges you're seeing? And then when we see there are certain projects or certain partners who may not be able, and there are multiple reasons why these delays happen. There could be, government convergence delays. There could be, many situations. The field is so dynamic, right? So those are circumstantial things, and we take that in our stride. But what we do is we ask them for projection of what else can you do, and our job is to also question and push the partner to say, how can you mitigate for this? Is there something else that you can reallocate? What you expect, will be unutilized by the end of the year. So sometimes they can, and that's fine. And if they can't, we will see how else we can reallocate that. But the whole issue is how do we catch this in a timely manner and then plan for it.
Sure. So better planning, closer monitoring. We have 2 minutes left, and I would certainly like to take some questions. Please identify yourself, and if there's a specific person who you want to direct to, you may want to do that. We'll first come here, then there, and then there. Yes. Yes, just 3 questions. Yes, of course. And I assure you, I am not giving any concluding remarks.
Hi, I'm Vanessa D'Souza. I'm from Sneha. Actually, my question is a continuation of yours, Ahona. I know utilization is a huge challenge for you all. I want to actually flip it the other side. What's often happening is that we are getting, and this is for everyone, not just for you, the disbursement doesn't happen on the 1st of the month, yeah? But we're expected to achieve numbers from the 1st of April right up to 31st of March. And the working capital needs then of the NGOs has really gone up because we're not getting funding till May, June, last year it was July. That creates a huge challenge because we also have to be mindful of domestic and FC funds. I'd love to know from you all, how we can address this.
Very quickly.
I think very quickly for us at Godrej, what we do is, we have 2 board meetings a year. All new projects and new partnerships, AOPs, all get aligned by, December, January typically. And then we do we meet the board, we meet with our, CEO, our chairperson, and we make sure that projects that are set up, all our MOUs are closed by that time for the next year. So November, December is the time when we are looking, actually we start a little early, October, November, December, we start looking at new projects, new programs, and we align our leadership, our board. So come 1st September, we are ready to kind of disperse. So we try to minimize as much of the delays as possible.
So pre-planning and, giving
pre-timing,
enough time.
aligning.
Are you facing that challenge? So, one suggestion I can give is just front load some of your requirements in the previous year's budget. Because after 2021, the law gives us a get out of jail card called the unspent CSR account. So with some partners, we've been using that to be able to help them because budgeting for large organizations also take time. For me, I manage a department. To get my budget also is a struggle internally because there's a lot of checks and balances for a large bank. So maybe you can use that so you can plan beforehand for with your
Sorry,
partners.
Vanessa, I'll have to. Yes, take the top line. We'll take one question. Perhaps we'll take both the questions and then I will direct and close because the bell will ring right now. Yes.
Good afternoon, all. I'm Alish Shikara. I'm the co-founder of Super Planter. We're a plant-based milk producer. My question is linked to the burden of cost of due diligence. Aloka earlier highlighted being mindful about this cost. Alona talked about additional pair of internal eyes being key. And Savita and Abhejit covered the importance of transparency, monitoring, and reporting. So my question is, to manage these costs, have you considered coming together as corporates to build and create shared systems and common frameworks to then manage some of these costs, and so the burden does not really fall on the receiving parties?
Sure. So Savita, perhaps and then
Basically, due diligence has become a mandatory thing for all the corporates. We cannot do any compromise in the due diligence process. So we have to keep this cost by default. So we can't say no to that.
Sure. Abhijit, very quickly and then...
Ultimately, it comes down to the engagement and the communication between a donor and the one who's receiving the funds. So somewhere that understanding has to be there, so the donor has to be understanding, and the partner also has to put that very strongly, that if you're not in a position to do it, that it cannot be done.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. I'm sorry that I've been told that there is, perhaps you could, I want to give an opportunity to raise that question. We'll not take it here, but I will, reflect for the time for the panelists to kind of perhaps do that, because I'm very mindful that there are 2 sessions remaining. Yes, but we can please raise this question. I want to give you that opportunity. Oh, the mic has been taken? Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. Again, Ambika from Green Yatra. So just to further this question about due diligence, see, the concern is that while it is imperative to have due diligence to understand where your monies are going, but the expectations have to be realistic. At one time, we are dealing with something like give us a 90% survival rate. The organic content on the soil is 0.3%. I'm talking about afforestation. We want to bring it up with organic content, but you're competing with this person who's making the sapling grow at 350 rupees, and you give us like a 5-year maintenance. I mean, you have to be realistic and understand that, how do we achieve this,
Yeah,
Also,
Ambika, sorry, Abhijit.
No, I'm sorry you had that experience. I think for an NGO, it's the best is to walk away from
Yeah,
that
exactly.
partner, from that donor.
And I think the answer also got, your question also got answered, where people said that it's about co-designing and investing in this time. Thank you, panelists. I would appreciate the time, and, we didn't have a structure, but I think we have been very candid. And thank you to the audience.
Thank you for the insightful discussion. I request all the speakers and the moderator to stay on days as I invite our Director General, Sandeep Khosla, Bombay Chamber, to present our mementos to our speakers. Can we have a round of applause, please? Can we have a group photograph, please? Round of applause.